Hey there.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good. 1 second. Is it just us two so far?
Yeah, so far.
Okay. I saw the other or I wasn't sure. I was like, am I supposed to be? Is it start at 7 or am I supposed to sign on at 7? I wasn't sure. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you signed on because like I started the meeting at 5:30 and since nobody was here yet, I was just like, did I do it right?
I know it'll be fun.
Yeah.
Someday we'll meet in person again, but
right. Yeah. Just thinking about like how to like start the whole thing and welcome people.
I know it's I'm so terrible at like public speaking, so like to moderate like an event, it's like my nightmare. I don't even think I could do it, to be honest with you.
That would be interesting. I'm like, as a musician, maybe you relate to this too, but like I used to have performance anxiety and I don't anymore, but like I still get nervous to talk between songs. Like
100%. Oh yeah. No, the stage fright goes like after like your 500th gig, you know, it's like it's hard to be like nervous. But also like when you're performing, like it's like I don't know, for me I'm not like engaging, I don't know. It's or I am, but I'm like more focusing on what I'm doing. And like I guess more so like but if I have to like speak in front of like just me on stage, like I used to do like a bunch of educational like clinics and stuff, and God, I hated that. So I mean I liked it, but I hated it because I had to be like, what's up everybody, and it's just not who I am. So but that was before COVID, so
work up that energy sometimes that seems like it's required, maybe it's not, but like I always feel like I have to be like energetic and like interesting when I'm teaching or like speaking in front of people. But
yeah, I just say I'm terrible at this, I'm just gonna be myself, and then like it kind of goes away, and then it's okay. But
yeah.
yeah, good to actually interact with you. I think I found you. I can't remember when I think I had you on Facebook like a while ago. But yeah, it'll be nice to get a bunch of studio nerds together for a thing.
Totally.
I'm trying to finish like there's like this project. I have like 8 songs that I have to like. I mean, best case scenario, finish tonight. And I'm like going through stuff, and like I just got a new computer, and like I transfer like some mixed stuff, and then like it just like has latency, and I'm just like, so I kind of just like having to go from scratch, because I don't feel like trouble, like like if you ever text stuff, it's like 5 hours will go by before you even accomplish something, so I'm like, oh dang it, I literally like I was here earlier and I was like, I got 1 song done and it's already 7 o'clock. I'm like, dang it, so I'm gonna be up here pretty late, but oh well, could be worse places.
Oh, I just realized. Do we have other people? Or there's other people here that I haven't let in.
Oh, perfect.
But I don't know. Allowed to talk? Hello?
Hello.
Hi, I'm sorry. I missed your entrance here.
I don't know what I'm doing, so that's fine.
Well, we're in the same boat.
Sweet.
Good.
Hey guys, are you reading me? This is Chris.
Yes.
Breest.
Hey, Chris. Hey.
I'm not seeing my. Let me get. Yeah,
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Right. I don't even see that camera option.
It's been so long since I've done like a Zoom meeting. Actually, it's like I got so used to Zooms for like a year and a half, and it's been a while since I've done one. So it took me a minute to figure it out as well.
Yes. Ryan, I'm not seeing your video yet either.
Yeah, let me. I'm not sure.
Yeah, something went screw with mine. I'm gonna try to zoom back in here in a minute.
All right.
Let's see.
Hey there, looks like I got the same issue. I'm gonna troubleshoot on my end. Hold on a sec. Well, hello. Can you guys read me all right over on that end?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh man, should I dim my lights too and like show off the lights? Looks cool.
Full cinema mode over here.
Yeah.
I'm in like full pasty mode here.
It's all good.
Let's see here. Hey, nice to see you, Brian. Let's see. You're muted here.
Mute. How about now?
Yeah.
Hello.
We got you.
Awesome.
Oh, welcome. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. I'm a little exhausted today, but things are all right. I'm excited to be a part of this. This is cool.
Yeah.
What kind of
I'm
project?
excited. Right. Nice to meet you.
I guess we're waiting on. Oh, Ian. Hey, Ian.
Hey, Cynthia.
Good to
Hey,
see you.
everybody.
How's it going?
Hello.
Good. How are you?
Doing well.
Wow, this is a group that has their lighting together. I like this.
I know. I saw Chris and I was like, oh man, should I dim my lights too and show off some of the lights?
Someday.
We look good. I'm proud of us.
I thought about like I was like gonna do this at home and I was like, I mean, we have to all be at the studios. Like,
Right.
it seems to make sense that way. So and then I have to get a bunch of stuff done, so it worked out.
Going.
How you been, Cynthia?
I've been doing well. Yeah, just kind of for those of you who I haven't met yet, which is most, I guess, all of you except for Ian. I just moved to Nashville at the beginning of the year, so I'm kind of getting plugged into the scene here. But it's been really good. I've been getting into live sound, which is kind of a surprise, but it's surprisingly been fun. I always thought that live sound would be like just really stressful, but it's been good.
It
Nice.
has its moments in my experience of being stressful, but you also meet a ton of people that way, which is awesome.
Totally. Yeah.
I've never tried doing live sound. It's always been like I've like people have like offered it, you know, just because of obviously, but like I'm like I don't do that. Like give me a guitar, you know. Like it's
Yeah.
not-
I used to do a lot of it, but I was happy to phase it out and just focus on the studio when I could.
yeah.
Cool. Well, did you guys see the I don't know who made this outline, if it was one of you or if it was Chris, but there's like a topics outline in the Google Doc that's shared. Like underneath all of the bios.
Yeah. I remember reading that.
I figure we can kind of just follow this. It seems like a good little structure. So I might just kind of say welcome or greetings to the viewers. And I think I've never done this before. I haven't like done a live stream or been the host of a live stream. So y'all might know this better than I do, but Elle was saying that there's typically like a 20-second lag between what we say and what happens on Facebook Live. So I'll probably get it started and then maybe wait for like 20 seconds and then get going. But yeah, do you guys have any thoughts or questions or like pre-game conversation before we dive in?
Well,
Well, it's-
Not really.
Nice to meet everybody.
Yeah, nice to meet everyone.
This is cool. Unfortunately, I don't have a mixing console in my view here, but I'm in kind of one of my smaller live rooms, but that's the control room right over here. But
Cool.
Nice.
so
Nice.
it was just easier for me to set up in here and the lighting and stuff. So whatever.
Well, we can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Loud
Yep.
and clear. definitely we need to make sure we have no audio issues.
Right. Is everything on my end sounding okay to you guys?
Yeah.
That's great.
Can hear you fine. Yeah.
Well, I guess we've got a minute. Anybody want to talk about like what kind of projects you're working on?
Yeah, it's been really busy. I'm sure probably most of you guys are like that too. Really since like the pandemic, it's just been like crazy. So, lots of them. I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure we all feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to, Ian, I'm like, I gotta work late tonight to get these out to you. Yeah, you know how it goes. I'll be up late tonight.
What's the project for, if you don't mind me asking?
It's a band's called Soul Meter. I think they're from Lansing. In their minds, they're just they're a bunch of stoners that don't really care too much, but they like write some cool stuff. So we worked on it a lot too. So it's fun. You know, it's like, you know, sometimes projects are like, you know, they come in and like track it. It's like a day or two or something, and then, you know, have it piece together. But we spent like a couple weeks in the studio, so that always makes it fun.
Great when you work with people that can do stuff in a higher quality way.
I know, instead of just trying to rush and like, you know, it's like, oh, I have $500. You're like, I don't know if that's something, but
Yep, nothing like being set up to fail to really make you feel like you're doing awesome.
Oh man.
Mr. Breest, what have you been up to, man? Your mic's off right now if you're talking.
Are you hearing me?
Gotcha now.
Yeah, we just had Wayne Kramer in from the MC5. Him and Dennis, the original drummer.
nice.
For,
Oh
a
man,
couple
that's
days,
awesome.
and
How's that?
it was really cool. It was a little terrifying right off the bat because the original drummer, Dennis, I mean, they're all in their 70s, but he like walked up the steps of the church and like immediately fell and hit his head like as he was entering the building. So we all kind of just were like, oh, I guess the session's over. We're going to send him to the hospital now. But he pulled it together and then drummed for the 2 or 3 hours that he was in cutting tracks.
God.
Yeah, it was
Wild.
not an ideal start to the session.
I
And,
mean, I just kind of imagined that like injury was just like a pregame ritual for the MC5.
yeah, maybe that was what it was. It was hilarious though, because like we for sure, like it was me in front of him carrying his snare and whatever, and then like him and then Binder, we called into the session Matt Binder, who I know Ian knows, but probably not the rest of you. And so he had like a full protection detail walking in, and he still managed to take a spill. Oh well. Yeah, that was a cool session. It's for an upcoming album they're working on now. And before that, I think I had mentioned to you, Ian, we had Jack Douglas, this producer that he did like the first 4 Aerosmith records, the first Cheap Trick record. He worked on Imagine. He did everything with Lennon after 71 to 81. So he's kind of a legendary cat. We had him in for like a week and a half. That was cool.
Badass, man. That must have been incredible.
Also got to bring Binder in on that session, so it was kind of like me and Ryan Highland, who's the chief engineer here, just getting to kind of get the band back together studio wise was a lot of fun. So we're hitting at 7 o'clock, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I actually am. My class is out in the live room. We run a bachelor's program here for Lawrence Tech, so I'm just gonna tell them that I'm gonna be incapacitated from class for the next little bit. I'll be right back.
Sounds good. Yeah, I guess now would be a good time to like get a tea or a coffee, use the bathroom if you need to.
That's what I'm doing. It's like, oh no, it's 8 minutes till.
Joel, what kind of projects have you been working on?
Well, yesterday was John Sanger. I don't know if you've heard of him. Older guy like me, but very cool. Yeah, so I'm working with a producer actually on this project, which is uncommon, but his name is Michael Kreppel, and he's originally from this area, but then lived in LA for the last 20 years and just moved back. So he's actually producing John, and so I get to kind of sit back and engineer, which is a treat sometimes when you don't have to do so much. So Can you hear me okay? I've never done this. So this is on my iPad. I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Good.
great.
All right.
yeah. What kind of music is it?
It's like, I would say alt country, folk, punk. Like it's a little, it's kind of, he kind of crosses all over the place. He's a big like old school Elvis Costello fan. He likes all kinds of just out there stuff, which is really fun. Nico Case, kind of just, so he's well rounded, I would say. But yeah, he plays around town. He's got several albums out, and he's had different iterations of it. But he's back to a solo thing again now. So he's got some guest musicians that are coming in and playing on the record. So that's been fun. Yeah, working with a producer, like I said, that's always fun for me because I get to do less. I get to focus on engineering. And so generally, I'm wearing that hat at the same time, which I'm sure you guys do too. And so yeah, that's a different game. So it doesn't happen very often, but once in a while when it does, I recommend it. It's a nice break from trying to run everything and be the producer and the engineer and the sometimes the babysitter. And
Well, it sounds like a fun project.
yeah, no, it's been fun. So we did vocals last night, and Michael Kreppel brought a lot of really interesting mics that I've never played around. He had a Gauge 47, which I still don't know much about that one, but it's supposed to be like a U47 clone, and it sounded great. He had a modded out Aventone C28 that we actually used on the acoustic that was really great. So it's fun because he's bringing in mics that I've never heard before, which is making me go, maybe I need one of those. So.
Fun but dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Not good for the pocketbook.
Right. Brian, what about you? What you've been working on?
Just doing a little bit of some mixing and mastering for a couple projects. We kind of had a collaboration of a bunch of musicians come in, and it's kind of like they're not like a proper band. They're like a bunch of individual musicians with their good friends. They come in and we'll track an album together. So it's kind of a really weird mix of different genres, mostly kind of rock and folk and kind of jazzier stuff. So there's like two parts of that, two kind of groups that I'm like working on. Yeah, it's really really interesting. So I'm just doing some mixing and mastering for that right now. I've got a couple bands that are in the process of coming in and doing some tracking here in the next week or two. It's been kind of a weird time for us at the studio because the space where I'm in now, I'm leasing. It was just bought by another company here, and we're going to have to move out in a few months. And so I'm trying to look for another space right now. So it's been a little stressful here, but trying to do as much as we can while we've got the space this summer. So yeah, it's crazy. Weird time.
Good luck with the search.
Thank you. Yeah.
Quick audio thing. I did hear a little bit of feedback or some sort of something going on. So I wonder if maybe headphones would be a good option, or maybe do you guys want to just like mute microphones when we're not talking? What do you think the best route would be?
I think headphones might fix it, but if it's like it's still a problem, yeah, we could just hit the old mute button. Let's see.
I've got a talkback button here I'm using, so should be feedback free, hopefully.
I don't know if I have a mic button on here. I have not explored this.
If you're using Zoom and you set your mic to mute, when you hit spacebar, it temporarily unmutes it, and you can kind of use that as like a talkback switch.
All right, only I'm on an iPad, so.
Well, you're screwed.
A mute button if I touch the screen.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that works just fine. Do we want to figure out like order of introductions before we start? Anybody want to volunteer to go first?
Definitely not me.
Got a group of extroverts here.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't mind. I'll be a sacrificial lamb if you need one.
Yeah, Ian can go first.
Thanks, Ian.
I'll set the bar real low for everybody. I'll hope.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
I used to do in school. I would always be like, I'll go first, and then not have anybody else to compare myself to.
Right. Going first has benefits, There's no
Yeah.
standard yet. You don't have to follow the, overachiever kit or anything.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that was like when I read everybody's bios, I was like, I was like everybody had like such cool bios. And then I'm a musician, and that kind of just fell into this, fairly
Right.
fairly recently. So my experience is
Same.
pretty limited. So
It's all smoke and mirrors when it comes to me. So
yeah.
Well, I think we're just about there. One thing that Elle mentioned was that it might be a good idea to have the Facebook page pulled up so that you can see comments if you want to. I'll also be trying to kind of keep an eye on those if anybody has questions or thoughts that they're commenting on the live stream on Facebook. So I can kind of try to field those too. But if you feel like,
Is it the MMA Facebook?
yeah, that's where it'll
Okay.
be.
MMA fighting.
Oh yeah. Did you know what you're getting into today?
Let's see.
Kevin, I think your mic is set so that we're hearing all of your keystrokes. You might want to change that setting on Zoom.
I'm on like several computers and a phone, so I'll just mute it.
There you go.
Oh, that is actually, I'm glad you said that. Because if you do have the Facebook page pulled up, just make sure that the video is muted on Facebook so that we don't get any kind of craziness happening.
So the questions will just show up in the feed. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. It should be like in
Okay.
the comments.
Okay.
I'm on the MMA page right now, and this will just pop up at some point, and then we click in.
It should, yes.
Okay.
So I will hit live on Facebook in a moment, and I think that should, I'll have to like sign into something. But it is 7. So any final thoughts before we dive in?
I think we're good. We
Yeah.
got this.
All right. Give me just a minute here.
So this is my second B-side session, so I got experience with the last one.
Got a veteran now.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, sorry, it's giving me more options than it was in the past. I think we're just about there. All right, I'm gonna go live and then we'll wait a few seconds and I'll get started. All right, hello, and welcome to the Michigan Music Alliance B-side session, the final one of the season. I'm super excited to be talking with all of these wonderful engineers about how to maximize your time in the studio. My name is Cynthia Kelly. I'll be moderating this today. And yeah, Ian, would you like to go ahead and start us off with an introduction?
Sure. My name is Ian Gorman. I am owner and head engineer of La Luna Recording in Kalamazoo. I've been doing this about 30 years, about 25 professionally. Worked at a bunch of big studios, interned, assisted, engineered, worked my way up, and then started my own freelance thing that kind of started as a home studio and grew into a pretty good size, busy facility here.
Awesome. Chris, how about you go next? Oh, is your mic on?
Okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
great. This is Chris Breest. I own Plymouth Rock Recording Company. I've been recording my own music and other people for about 20 years now. Met a lot of great musicians and interesting producers over the years. I have this old church now that we took over in 2002 and started building out the studio. It's a 5,000 square foot facility. It has 2 large format studios and 4 small project studios. This also is the location of the Lawrence Tech University satellite campus for the Audio Engineering Technology Bachelor's program. And yeah, I'm just excited to be here with you guys and talk a little about studio.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Kevin, would you like to go next?
Yeah. My name is Kevin Kozel. I have not been recording for 30 years like you guys, but I've been a professional musician for about 15. And I've produced a lot of projects when I was a musician, so started to learn how to use the studio stuff and just kind of got into it. And I run I'm the chief engineer at Third Coast Recording Company in Grand Haven, and yeah.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. Brian.
Hello, my name is Brian Chamberlain. I own Studio Anatomy in Traverse City, Michigan, which it's kind of a really crazy art collective recording studio, music venue. We have art studio workspaces. We have a record shop. It's this old building downtown. The whole lower level, like basement area, kind of converted this over to a studio and venue about 10 years ago. I've been recording kind of on and off since I was my late teens, mostly recording my own bands and then performing a lot in as a musician, and then kind of doing some recording on the side over the years, kind of going back and forth. But over the past 10 years, started this space and been recording and just kind of been doing that full time for a while now. But yeah, and I'm just really excited to meet everyone here today and be a part of this.
Awesome. And last but not least, Joel.
I actually started off as a songwriter of all things, and so I did go to recording school when I got out of high school for about 6 months at the Recording Institute of Detroit. But I didn't. They had me take a couple classes that I really didn't. One of them was Dianetics, believe it or not, which I don't even know if anybody knows what that is. But it's a course by L. Ron Hubbard that's supposed to help you be able to read manuals faster. And so I ended up getting out of that, but I started as a songwriter, and as a songwriter, you just have to do that kind of thing. I always had 4 tracks. I always had recording gear and was always tinkering and dabbling with stuff like that, just to get my own ideas down, and had a small career as a songwriter in a band called Papa Vegas. And from there, just started recording other people in my basement of all places, just because I kind of always had the stuff around, and people, hey, would you work with us? And I sure. And it kind of springboarded to my wife and I finding a property that had an outbuilding on it that we would convert into a studio, just for me to actually start making a go of that, because I wanted to transition from. And I'd been doing the Verve Pipe and traveling, and I just find that I like to be home more than I like traveling. So I've kind of been slowly transitioning into not being out on the road and trying to do more and more of production and recording and engineering. And I feel like my heart's there now that I'm older. So I don't need to run around and have my kicks, so to speak, in every city in the country. It was fun, but it's nice to be home too. So yeah.
That's great. I feel like it's so important to like figure out what is right for you, and like
yeah, for sure.
priorities need to be, and like how to manifest that in like your career endeavors.
Right.
But But yeah, I feel like too what you were saying about just kind of made me think about how, what is it, necessity drives creativity? Is that what they say?
Right. Yeah.
I'm sure like
Yeah,
I feel like a lot of engineers maybe got into it that
for
way,
sure.
like
Right.
Yeah.
what we needed, and then it's like, oh hey, this is cool, this is fun, maybe I can do
Yeah.
this too.
I would, if you would have asked me when I was younger if I was going to be doing this, I would have definitely not said, yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing. But I love it. I tell you, man, I mean, because it's got all the best parts of songwriting and the creativity, all the parts that I loved about being in a band and being a songwriter. And in a way, being a front man is kind of like being a producer, because you're kind of like dictating and bringing the songs into the band. And so it's a very similar role, I feel like, and it's more fun and you get to stay home.
So awesome, thank you all for those lovely introductions.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be here as well. Grateful to Michigan Music Alliance for having me moderate this event. So again, the purpose of this is to talk about how to maximize people's time in the studio. And so I'm curious of the best way to get into this, if it's maybe someone has like a story to share of an example of like someone who came in and had all their stuff together, all the arrangements, everything. I'm sure that's how it goes every time, right? Or maybe we could start out with like just the importance of being prepared and what that might look like. Because I'm sure it might vary depending on the type of project that you're doing, whether it's like an improvisational, more jazz inspired kind of project or something that's more pop. Does anybody have any thoughts that they might want to share on that?
Sure, we all do.
Yeah.
Who would like to start?
I'll jump in. From my vantage point, most of the things that I kind of pull from are experiences that I had as a musician, and experiencing as a musician trying to figure out how do you get into the studio and get the most out of it. If you don't own your own studio, which has changed over the years, it used to be a much more exclusive thing. I think it's more democratized now, where you can be in your house, you have more time, you can, kind of get comfortable. And for me, going into professional recording studios, that was the biggest struggle, was to get to a mental space where I felt like I was doing my best the way I could in my home on my 4-track. Because the studio, when you're going into it in the beginning, it's a very like foreign place, and there's just so many different things happening if you're not used to being in that environment that are like off-putting, and in a lot of cases result in a poorer performance, less intimacy, and all of the things that you're trying to get to as an artist, and on the flip side as an engineer or a producer. So to me, it was always figuring out how to get as quickly as possible into that comfortable space. And it's different for everyone. There isn't a, linear 4-step thing that you do. And ultimately, which is unfortunate in the sense of trying to just maximize studio time, is you need to be in the studio a lot so that you can go in there and get comfortable. And there's no magic way to, in my opinion, to replicate that unless you can be in a studio. And so that's kind of, part of it, I think, is we all had alluded to, a lot of us, if not all of us, are musicians. And how I got into the studio was by interning and getting comfortable in that studio, because I could be there at 2 a.m. when everyone else was gone. So, I don't know if that's going to work for everyone, but I certainly think that to me, the maximizing aspect of it is like getting over the discomfort and the foreignness of what happens in a studio that's just not the same as playing on stage or in a rehearsal space or with your friends or in your bedroom. So that's a really important thing to at least know you're going to be encountering going into a studio as kind of a novice.
Yeah.
That popped an idea in my head too. Obviously, like, preparedness. I mean, like, if you don't know how to play your songs well and you have to do 16 takes of something and you can't play to a click track or something, it's going to make it really difficult to, you can edit it if you want to, but I would say some of the best projects and the easiest ones that, even if they've taken a lot of time or whatever, the ones that have just, when everybody's happy and they've gotten the most kind of attention or whatever, is the vision needs to be clear too. Some artists kind of come in, especially kind of per your point, that they're not experienced in a studio, so they don't really recognize the rules, but it's like, I mean, music obviously just starts up in our heads, and if you don't have like a pretty firm picture of what your project is supposed to be, I haven't run into too many issues with stuff like that, but I've seen it, and it's like, you do as much as you can to help. But if people just, and then there's another side to that, like if people just let things be and let the engineer and let the producers kind of like, do their thing. But sometimes with local artists, especially, if you're working with somebody on a tight budget or something, like they don't have a producer or something, so, but yeah, it's like, yeah, just to have a clear vision of, of your expectation, and that's been an important thing that I've learned over the years for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, one thing I would maybe that really comes to mind when it comes to artists, working with them in the studio, especially ones that are not as experienced being in a studio environment. I work with a lot of younger artists, a lot of local bands, and they come in, and I know, like, for them, it can be very intimidating to come into a studio and see all this really expensive gear, and knowing that we have all this experience and they don't, so there's an intimidated. So it's about like really making them feel comfortable, because you want to be in a place where you feel comfortable so you can like really unleash that creativity and feel good. Like, I don't want to start like talking all this like technical jargon they don't understand, because they're going to be like, this is weird, this is uncomfortable. They're just being comfortable. I was almost kind of joked too about turning like some of our like recording studio into like a bedroom. Just make it like, put like a bed and a nightstand, and like, make it look all comfy so people feel more comfortable. But we do get a lot of compliments here about having really like kind of chill atmosphere, and that's really important. Just feeling like, okay, we can come in and not feel really intimidated. Because I've personally felt like that when I've come into studios for the first time. And it's just like, this is really scary. I shouldn't touch anything. I don't know. This is weird. I'm more comfortable at home in my bedroom doing this kind of thing. So just having that comfort and being able to like, sometimes that just takes up one full session just to kind of feel that. And then the next going forward, just flows along more smoothly.
I can piggyback on something about what you're all saying. A lot of more experienced artists that I work with will track their albums in big blocks of time. They'll do full days, often multiple days in a row, weeks if they have the budget for it. And there's a whole bunch of reasons I think that's a great approach. For one, it's just really efficient. You're not sitting and tearing down over and over, blah, blah, blah. But a big part of it is the comfortability in the studio. It's not just a matter of being comfortable with the studio as a concept and a process, but it's about getting in a situation where you've got the tones dialed in, you've got your headphones dialed in, you're in a chair that you like, you know what I mean? Like all of that stuff, you're in the zone, you're in it with this group of people. And you show up on the first day and you spend a few hours setting up and sound checking, get everything dialed in. But then after that, it's just playing music, and you're not thinking about the technical side. You're not worrying about all that stuff about your headphone mix not being right or whatever. You've got that all ironed out, and then you can just get in the zone and play music. But a lot of times that necessitates a bigger period of time in the studio to really get into that. If you're doing these small, a lot of times more beginning bands or people that have families, day jobs, that kind of thing, they have to record in smaller, we just need to do an evening here, a few hours there, and it's so much harder to get in the zone and really get into the music that way. Plus it's not as efficient. You're having to set up and tear down over and over again. There's a reason why a lot of big records are recorded that way.
I think the most important part, just per your point too, is what I've noticed too, is like when if somebody, like I said, has a day job and you can really only do Sundays, but weekends book up first, and then it's like, oh, we could do this session, but then like, oh, I'm booked out. I could do 6 Sundays from now or something, and then it's like to get back into that headspace, and that's the best part. Like I'll put people up in town, and it's like just so we can wake up and focus, not like only solely on the project. And those are always obviously what come out the best, but every project is different, obviously, but that is a huge help for sure.
Joel, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I agree with everything everyone's saying. Ian's right on. I mean, it's if you have the budget and can block off of multiple days like that, there's a huge benefit in being able to, like you said, come back and get in that chair again. You're kind of, as each day progresses, you get a little bit more freed up, a little bit more bold, maybe, because you feel more comfortable. And I know we're kind of not going off of the script exactly when it comes to some of the topics, but I mean, this kind of plays into the same thing as the pre-production idea that we were slated to talk about is a huge thing that tends to get overlooked now, I feel like. And that can also be a huge factor in giving people a big level of comfort, to know that you've got a game plan, and to know that you've got, oh, there's my dad. To know that you have things laid out, you have an action plan, you know what you're doing, you know what you're getting into. You're not coming in going, well, where should we start? And everybody's kind of scratching their head. And so again, I mean, having multiple days and having a little bit of pre-production under your belt can make a huge difference in your level of being comfortable. So I agree, yeah, with everything.
Absolutely. I'm curious. I know, somebody was mentioning like having how home studios are really common now. And
Yeah.
wonder, like, I know a lot of people will maybe record like scratch tracks at home, or even like do band stuff in the studio and then like overdub later at home.
Yep.
How do you think that could be a potential help in preparing for a session if you have access to that kind of equipment at home?
Well, for me, the trick there is always if the person has a little bit of competence at recording, because a lot of times when you have that kind of thing going on, you'll get files in that are like at -0 that are already mastered, and I mean, there's all kinds of hazards that you can fall into when you have people doing stuff at home. But then there's also people who are really good at it. So if the person you're working with has a level of competency in terms of home recording, it can be a huge benefit, because it can allow them to be comfortable. They're in their own space, they're at home, they're able to take the vocals as many times. Say if they're doing a vocal track, they can take it over and over and over again. They can drive themselves crazy, which they would be much less willing to do when they're paying money, obviously.
Yeah.
And so it can get a really great vocal out of them. However, if they don't have a pretty good level of competence at that, it can be a bit trickier to bring that into your production and to mix it down the road. So it kind of depends on the artist at that point.
Brian, anything to add? Saw you nodding a lot over there.
Yeah. So obviously we see a lot of musicians, artists these days that do a lot of tracking at home. I mean, most people can pick up a laptop and even get a copy of Reaper or something and start doing some multi-track recording. So it could be a really great thing if they still plan on coming into a studio and have an engineer track them and everything. And really for me, it's just like if they can, click track is a big thing, especially for artists that haven't really done much professional recording or in a studio, is getting into that habit of just like really playing along to a click and using headphones as well. Because a lot of times those bands are rehearsing together as a band or a group. They're not usually wearing headphones. They come into a studio, they got headphones on, everything sounds weird, and the mix is like, I'm just not comfortable and not getting into that. So it's just like if you're at home and you're able to kind of set that up, have a basic interface and some headphones, have a click track and play along to that, that's going to help tremendously when you come into a studio for the first session. It's going to feel a lot more comfortable for people that maybe don't have that experience in a studio. So that can be a benefit of being able to have those tools at home these days. So yeah.
One thing I would want to add on the click track thing that I think I've discovered over the years that is of paramount importance when you're trying to make real, authentic recordings that have feel is learning how to not just play to the click track, because everyone's like, oh, I can play to a click. Yeah, it sounds fine. But to actually understand what we're saying when we're talking about playing to a click track and playing to it with feel and with all of the things that you all, in a perfect world, you don't have a click track. We all just have great rhythm and tempo, and all of that magically happens. But in the modern approach, more often than not, you're using a click track. And so people hear this concept and they're like, yeah, okay, so I played a click at home and it's kind of working. And they're not really, sort of analyzing, are they playing to the click track or are they playing to the click track where it feels right, and there is push and pull still on the beat, because that is all of that. And we're talking cents, real small incremental changes, but that is everything in music. That is all of the feel as to why this drummer sounds like this drummer, and everybody else that plays like that same part doesn't sound the same. It's because of feel. And I think that's, one thing that I learned recording my own stuff is just how when my ear finally dialed in enough to understand that, and there's no quick way to do it. I think you just need to really sit there and try to be honest with yourself and listen to the playing and listen back to it and listen to it against the click and just try to explore and figure out what that is, because when you can start doing that, and it really, to me, takes everything up a whole nother level as far as performance wise. And sometimes that's just by making a click that's not a straight tone. You make a beat that's looped, and that helps. But whatever it is, whatever that process is, I think, artists need, especially newer ones, need to really understand what that means, and that those micro, adjustments that are the difference between the top 0.5% people and everyone else below.
I think also it's important. Yeah, this might be a controversial statement here, but I don't think you always have to have a click in the studio by any means.
Absolutely.
And of course, there's a lot of arguments that certain styles and certain bands and certain songs benefit without it. But even apart from that production decision, if you're an artist who's not used to working with a click track, going into an expensive hourly studio and then trying to do it on the clock is 9 times out of 10 a horrible idea.
Yeah.
Talking about not maximizing studio time, that's a quick way to turn a 4-hour session into a 4-day session. If you're trying to play to a click and you're trying to get everything to the grid and you just don't have those skills, practice that at home.
Yes,
Don't do that on the clock trying to make a record.
That's the pre-production stuff, I think, that you really gotta, if you're gonna think about pre-production, is like that stuff, not doing exactly what Ian says.
I've had bands that have come in that want to use a click. We get a click going within 2 minutes. I'm like, no click, guys. We're not doing this with a click.
I've had that happen, not all the time, but like it's definitely like, especially if we're focusing on maximizing the studio time. The benefit of obviously even just staying with a click, with the push or pull or with the feel or whatever. But I mean, I got my start doing session playing and doing those things. So it's like to me, like when I just like sing a song or like I hear this in my head, like it's like it doesn't sound like that necessarily, but and I get that some people aren't like that, but the benefit of it too is as far as like being efficient with it. It's like, man, so many times like if I have a whole bunch of takes not to a click track, for instance, because I agree with Ian, if I'll give it about 2 minutes. Be like, if it's gonna break the feel and that kind of vibe that they have, we'll just ditch it, The benefit of it though, obviously, is if you do, 4 takes or 8 takes or whatever it is, every single one of those takes is usable information easily, and you open up a playlist, there's a bass note that's screwed up, instead of trying to find that note with the similar dynamic and sound, which takes time. Obviously it takes a lot of time, and it's like you just go to the other take and they're like, nobody usually screws up the exact same part every single take, but there's human error obviously involved, and that is one thing for sure that like I definitely prefer people who can play with it, if that's the case. But yeah, that's helped me tremendously. It's like just only because of that reason, in the editing process and just organizing everything, making sure all the notes are there and stuff. So that's a big benefit for sure, and worth the practice. Because if you can't play to a click track, like if a click track is at 60 BPMs versus 200, I'm playing that song at those BPMs, that's kind of the boss. And with the feel, like kind of Chris mentioned as well, like you don't ignore it, but it does keep it keeps the session in line with every take that you do, you know, which is very beneficial as well.
Absolutely. And we keep kind of coming back to this like pre-production idea. And I think there might be a lot of different ways to think about that. And like there's so many different aspects to what goes into pre-production. So maybe we can kind of take a minute to talk about a few different elements, like what to each of you is the most important element or are the most important elements of pre-production, and how people in a tangible way can be prepared to come into the studio.
I'll start. For me, a really crucial part of pre-production is figuring out what approach is going to work for that artist and that project. It's not a one size fits all thing. It's not that you have a pre-production meeting for me to tell them how they should record to do it professionally. It's a conversation. It's me sussing out their experience, what their style, what they're looking for, and figuring out the best way to do that. Whether that answer is we're going to put all of you in the room together with no headphones, or whether the answer is we're going to start with the drums to a click and then add the bass, then add the guitar, or any combination in between. It's about figuring out at least a starting point, which sometimes changes. Sometimes you have an idea of where you want to start, and then you get into it and you go, plan A isn't working, let's try plan B or whatever. It's also a matter of communication with the band, of trying to create a situation with healthy and realistic expectations and goals. You know, working within their budget. You know, in a dream world, we would all have infinite money to tweak our kick drum sounds for 5 hours for every song that we do. But in the real world, we have to work with an artist's budget, and that affects our approach. That affects, okay, we're going to do this live. We're going to do it like this. We're going to do whatever. And trying to figure out a way to get them what they want within that budget, but also with the understanding that there are trade-offs. And if they have a level 1 budget, they shouldn't have level 10 expectations and that kind of thing. Yeah, just communication. You know, so much of our job is trying to get inside the head of the person that we're working with and trying to figure out what their goals are, what is a great sounding album to them, what they're looking for, and us trying to interpret that the best we can. So communication, preparation.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be one thing that would be beneficial for groups coming into a session is obviously having a game plan of maybe which songs to start with, especially maybe start with songs that they're very, very familiar with and they know they're really tight, really confident with. Because I think a lot of it, like coming in and being prepared, knowing how this whole song is laid out and arranged, can help with their confidence for the rest of the session and with the other songs. And that's just kind of that comfortability thing too, just knowing how the song is and everyone's on the same page about it, and being able to start with something that they're most comfortable playing with and most familiar with. And you know, I think that might be just a good start, just with starting with the song they're very comfortable with. That's obviously going to be more efficient too, but also kind of a boost for their confidence, you know, moving on with the session.
I think it totally depends on the artist and the project. I think that the dynamic has changed so much. Whereas 20 years ago, everything used to be album based. You know, everybody was doing albums. I don't want to speak for everybody on the panel, but I mean, there are so many bands now that tend to do 1 or 3 songs or 2 songs, and then they take some time off. And so the old method of pre-production, I mean, God, when we did our record, Papa Vegas, back in the day before we went to Los Angeles to record, we did a week of pre-production here in Grand Rapids at Flatwater Studios over in Grand Rapids, Bruce and Wendy's place. The producer came out here. We went to their house every day for 8 hours for like, I think it was 6 days straight. And that was all before we ever set foot in the studio, and went over every inch of the 14 songs. I mean, I just don't feel like that's the kind of world that we're living in anymore. And so I agree with Ian. Every project's got to be treated, you know, differently. Unfortunately, there isn't like a one size fits all approach to pre-production anymore. And so the best thing that you can do, especially as a band and a musician, is I would say record your rehearsals. If you're coming in to do a song or two, you should just know the song. I can't tell you how many times I have had bands come in and we get set up, we're tracking, we're recording. And after the first couple takes, they come in and they listen to a playback and somebody goes, "When did you start playing that note? I've never heard that note before." And you're like, "Wait a minute, are you guys serious? You guys don't know that?" And they're like, and part of that is you're in a different environment now where you can finally really hear, hopefully, everything really clearly, and you're hearing it sometimes for the first time, because let's be honest, rehearsal spaces, if they're in basements, garages, bedrooms, a lot of stuff goes unchecked. So one of the things that's pretty common for me is you'll have a bass player that maybe plays a little heavy-handed. And so they're listening to their bass playback for the first time and it's super clacky. Well, they've never recorded themselves, or maybe they haven't sat and played the actual band songs outside of rehearsal in their bedroom with their rig, and notice that when they play, they get so much fret knock. So, I mean, there's so many things we could talk about just in this whole idea of being prepared. But man, yeah, there's so many sides to pre-production that we could spend 3 hours and still not get through it all, right, guys? Oh my gosh.
One of the things I mentioned vision, like kind of one of the first comments that I said, and Ian mentioned it kind of per this conversation. Basically that, like, kind of our job as engineers or producers, like you are trying, well, like, I don't know, you're trying to kind of read people's minds, and the more that's not part of the picture, the better everything is. Like if you know exactly what you're going for, like that's when you develop that trust really quickly, where it's like, no, you don't have to be here today. I know what you're going for. Like I could just do it myself. And so, like, I mean, like, I'll ask for, I don't usually ask for too many things, but like I don't know these people, so like you are sort of guessing, and you don't know, like, everything's genre bending now. It's like if you're playing rock and roll back in the 50s, pretty easy to like assume what that's going to sound like, but nowadays it's like, people will be like, they want to be 70s, but they're like a hard rock band, but they're doing psychedelic stuff, or so there's different approaches there, because there's, I don't know, but yeah, I don't know, like reference, even like thinking of like, oh, what is your vision to want it to sound like? So you have some sort of reference to point to. It's like, I'll usually ask for a reference track or two, usually not more than that, but just to immediately just kind of like put myself into that vibe of what we're going for. Because if you listen to a jazz record versus a Metallica record, like for a week, you're gonna be not necessarily in the same place. And yeah, it's communication is the most important thing, for sure.
Reference tracks are great.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Prince, do you want to add any thoughts on the tangible pre-production idea?
You're muted.
Oh,
I'm still muted.
There
Can
you
hear
go.
me now?
There you go. Yeah.
I think it's just my the gate's not breaking. But yeah, I think there's just so much that goes into it. There's so many things we could talk about, from making sure that everyone's on the same page to being able to even just know, like, what's your general tempos, what are your general keys, and you're trying in a pre-production sense to lock in all of this information and be able to communicate that to the producer and the engineer. And then at the same time, when you get into the studio, you also want to try to be open to changing all of that. Not to say that you should just throw it all out the window, but it's like, if you're so locked into, like, I always sing it this way, I've always played it this way, you're suffering from, what we call demoitis. Is like, a producer says, well, why don't you cut this, transition in half and make the pre-chorus like only 2 bars, and it's like, well, it can't be, that's wrong. And trying to really be able to go into the session after you've done all this pre-production and still be willing to hear something that's completely out of left field and embrace it. And it doesn't mean that you have to stick with it, but to understand that everyone's there for the same goal. And if somebody gives you a suggestion, not to just mimic, okay, you want me to hear it, but to really put everything into exploring that suggestion, I guess, so that, it, and again, that's back to like the weird duality of what we're talking about, where you're saying lock everything in, figure it out, but also be okay to change everything, and it's all over the place, clicks, not clicks, so much has to happen when you actually get everyone in the room, and the pre-production is just giving you as much of a chance to succeed at that moment when everyone's there as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so kind of like thinking through all of the elements and like being prepared in that way, but then still staying flexible to new ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a note in our little notes here about tones. Does anybody have, I know that's like the broadest thing, but like just any ideas of how people can prepare and just kind of like have some tones in mind, whether that's for drums or guitars? Any takers?
Yeah, I mean, just having it's really obviously really helpful for an engineer to have any kind of reference track or any songs or particular albums that bands like, oh, I love the sound of this bass, these drums, whatever. That's extremely important. It's very beneficial, very helpful, especially when you're getting tones in the studio, kind of knowing ahead of time what they're kind of after. So that's I think a really great tool to have ahead of time, is having something to reference. Yeah.
I think just in a simple way, kind of how, because like I do like, and definitely Ian knows this because I send him all my tracks for mastering. But like if there's a bad thing, like I can lean into that, like I think for me it's just it's trying your best in whatever capacity, even if it's just a few percentage points, to make whatever you're doing sound cool, whatever that means, I don't think tone. I mean, like obviously, if a guitar tone that sounds bad is going to be hard to, make sound good in a sense if it's really thin or whatever. But those are pretty easy things. Like I'm sure all of us. Like, I mean, how many guitar amps do you have, Ian? I mean, like I have 20. Like, I mean,
When you leave them alone, they tend to multiply.
yeah, exactly. Like I don't even know how we have so many. And yeah, I mean, it's just. Yeah, I mean, and kind of to Chris's point too, and to Joel's, as far as like every session is different, so having an open mind, kind of like it's not even if you plan everything out and you write this schedule, like something's gonna go wrong. It's probably more likely to go wrong if you write out like, oh, here's your bathroom break, here's your lunch, I don't. But you can still, that's still helpful if you have a lot of people working on it, so you can coordinate with everybody. But it's still going to change no matter what, and yeah, like I said, with the tone stuff, it's how well obviously the intention of the songs is really important because that's going to change your tone sculpting, in a sense. And a lot of times, like I'll be like, if there's a cracky snare and because they're playing all these funk tunes or whatever, and then all of a sudden it's like, obviously they're doing something. He's playing a lot of ghost notes or something, but it's a dry like Wolfpecky snare. It's like, all right, now this isn't gonna work. You switch it out or whatever. But yeah, I don't know, just on a simple way, because it's easy to overcomplicate things like that, I think. And I think just if I think it sounds interesting and cool, like I can use that, yeah.
I think Kevin makes a great point about having different amps, different instruments available, swapping out snare drums, like you say. Sometimes newer artists come to the studio and they're like, this is our gear. We are just going to record this like a live show or whatever. But man, like the studio is a playground, and a tone on one song might be totally different than a tone on another song. Or you double the guitar with a different guitar and different amp or whatever. You have all these different color options. And so whether that's you bringing stuff or going to a studio that already has that stuff, at Third Coast, I don't know how many drum sets you guys have, but so many. You have a whole room full of gear.
A room full, yeah.
Yeah. And so, having all of those color options, being able to try messing around with different stuff for different tunes. And another thing that's attached to that doesn't really fit into the outline here that we had prepared in our pre-production meeting for this talk, but something that I want to mention at some point, something that can be super helpful when preparing for the studio, is get your guitar set up or intonated, get some fresh strings, that sort of thing. For a $50 setup or $75 setup or whatever, it might make your guitar sound better and more in tune for the whole album. You know what I mean? Borrow some instruments. When my band gets together to do a record, we do the multi-day thing and we camp out in the studio and we all bring tons of toys and guitars and we borrow this from this person, have all of these different color options available. I'll take my main guitar over to Caltone, my repair place here, and have them set it up. a setup can save you hours of tuning and editing time later.
Completely agree, and I've had those issues recently, even on the record you just mastered for me last week. Like it turned out great, and their show went well yesterday, and but there was time where we had 9 guitars, and because of the freaking his chord progression, if you play an E chord on a guitar and then you play like a bar chord, like a B bar chord or something, there's gonna be a little bit of a difference between the intonation if it's not set up correctly, and you can notice that on a record. It's even Scar Tissue by Red Hot Chili Peppers. You can't play to that song because of equal temperament tuning, they had to tune up the freaking B string, to make that riff sound good on record. It's once you put everything under a microscope, all of the imperfections sort of come out. So and how many times, I'm sure all of you, it's a drummer insists on using his own drums, but then his toms are just terrible. So then you spend an hour putting tape and paper towels and all this stuff, trying to just get it to sound good or whatever, or hiring somebody to tune it even. But the better, it's Bill Chrysler. He told me the one of the best things that he's ever told me is, hey, if you put a $5 mic in front of Frank Sinatra or a $10,000 mic in front of Frank Sinatra, who does it sound like? There's sculpting that we can do with microphones and things like that, but ultimately, if something sounds bad and you put $1 million worth of gear in front of it, it's probably just going to sound even more bad, almost, in a sense, and making sure that your gear is set up, sounds good before you get to the studio. Otherwise, I'm going to have to do it, and I'm not a drummer, I'm a guitar player, so I can help out with that really well, and I've been getting good at drums and stuff like that, but I don't know how to tune drums very well. I'm not a drummer, so if your tom sounds terrible, if your snare sounds terrible, obviously, really, really, really important, top notch important. The better you sound, the easier we're going to be able to do our profession and make everybody happy,
I went to a recording conference in the fall that had a workshop just on drum tuning at an audio and recording conference.
Yeah.
You have to do everything nowadays.
You do. I've gotten really good at doing guitar setups lately. I almost just plan on it. I don't know what happened. Disc makers, remember disc makers? They used to send out a leaflet that told you all these kind of things that we're talking about. But apparently that information is no longer available because, kids come in all the time with their guitars and I'm like, we'll check it on the tuner and the intonation's just way off. I get the tools out usually when the band shows up, just to be ready for somebody's guitar that needs a touch up or something. And the drum tuning thing is huge. You can have a great drummer, great mics, but if the drums are tuned even just a little bit off, it can just ruin everything. So, I can't even emphasize how important drum tuning is. And so I've been trying to get better. There's a great book, and the name's going to escape me, but I'm sure that it was probably at the conference that Ian was at. It's a great book, and it goes really deep into the resonant head and the top head and matching them versus having the bottom one higher than the top head. But man, if you get those drums tuned, you can even have drums that maybe don't have the newest heads, but if you get those heads tuned up, man, they will sing even with just good old 57s and some tuned drums, and you'll be happy.
Absolutely.
We've got a question here from another Ian, and it says, what are your recommendations for experimenting with gear in the studio, but still being efficient with time? Anybody want to conclude on that?
I know Ian.
Yeah.
They did their record here. Let's I'm gonna read. Hold on. Oh man, that's the whole budget scenario. But for me though, I think if you spend twice of the amount of time getting the right sound, you're going to save so much more time later with mixing. Once if you get a really sweet sound, how many times, maybe you put a high pass filter on it or something. Sometimes you just really don't have to do very much, especially if you've got outboard gear. Oh, he just said, hey, Kevin, what's up, Ian? And so I don't know, for how really minimal it takes, all you have to do, if you play, it's kind of with musicians and stuff, it's for me, if I grab a guitar and sometimes I'm just I'll buy it, and I don't mean to buy a guitar necessarily, but it just feels good and sounds good. And I like the energy of it. Yeah, I don't know. To take that extra time, I think is actually, in a sense, it seems like you're taking more time doing stuff because people are sitting around. But in the post, I mean, tracking is the easy part. Like the mixing and exporting and mastering and like all like that's probably the most time that people usually spend budget wise, you know. So, and instead of just rushing through that stuff to like please them in the moment, I think it's better to be more firm and get the right sound and take your time with it, because like I said, tracking is the easy part. It's like putting it together is hard.
An extra hour of sound checking can save you 20 hours of mix time and sound
So
better.
yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
I think another real common, I think about a lot of this stuff through the lens of beginner mistakes, either that I've made or see with other people. And a real common mistake in my view is bands coming into the studio and wanting to rush the tracking process and the sound check process and getting impatient
Yeah.
and worrying about all of that. And it's like, no, you don't just come in and throw down whatever and then mix it to greatness later. You got to start with the fresh ingredients. You got to start right off the bat. So, a lot of times the more experienced bands I work with, they'll plan the first half day, just set up and sound check and getting tones, coming in, listening, doing a bunch of listening. That's so important. Trying out different mics, getting the tone right. So like Kevin says, when it comes time to mix, you don't want to be fixing stuff. You want to have your tones already be awesome. That's going to save you so much time and money in the long run and sound better.
Well, you could focus on the depth and the emotion of it, like if you just focus it on like trying to just like edit and like just fix everything, it's like you said, I mean, like it just hours will go by so quickly, whereas you should be focusing on like it's like that's like kind of like a logical thing, I don't know, to have to put stuff together, but like and sometimes that's a case, like kind of to Joel's point, like every project is different, and sometimes people, like there's professional musicians that have been doing it for 20 years. But if somebody's doing it for 1 year, it doesn't exclude them from what we do necessarily at that point. So it's very diverse. I mean, every session is very different. It's impossible to be, the same on every single one.
I think Ian's so spot on with the statement about, we're saying this word maximizing studio time. So the first inclination for somebody that's a beginner or a novice coming into this is like, okay, we're going to come in, we're going to cut 22 songs in the first day, and then we're going to do, and they have this whole thing figured out, and they think that's maximizing studio time. But what I think we're trying to tell everyone on this from this panel is that you have to look at it in a holistic sense of not just the one session you're cutting tomorrow, but how that ties in with the editing that's going to happen, with the mixing that's going to happen, and think about how do you maximize this whole piece, and not just, we got in, we cut 27 tracks and they all suck, and now we can spend more time trying to edit them and more trying to mix them.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing to me, which is it sounds stupid and cliche to say, but it's like, write great songs. Focus on writing amazing songs, because it's not about having 500 mediocre songs. It's write one unbelievable song and focus on the craft of songwriting, because that helps inform the tones and the performances and the people and the levels of people that are going to play with you. It's that to me is, even though it's so ethereal and it's not something you can really pin down, it's like, you want to maximize studio time, have great songs and come in with great players, the best you can get with you, and that's gonna, if you have a great engineer producer like Ian or anyone else on this panel, they're gonna dial into that right away, and it's gonna pay off for you in the long run.
I have one more thing to say on this topic, because sort of like this is kind of started with pre-production, but like now we're kind of talking in the studio, getting tones, etc. And communication, it really is like obviously one of the big things we've talked about. Like if a artist who like to feel comfortable being like, I don't like that snare sound, instead of saying that like after your second round of mixes and being like, really, like, I mean, it's like literally being mastered or soon or whatever, because I've had that happen, or I've seen it happen. It's not happened to be too much, like really, but like little things like that will happen. And you're like, I would have changed the snare, but I didn't know that was an issue, the whole time. And then they didn't really feel comfortable to say that, until the very last minute or something. And that's the whole thing. It's like, just like I said, communication. And then like, if you don't like something, like we can change. I mean, any of us can change that stuff in a split second. I've got 17 snare drums. I mean, we'll put a different one on, but yeah, that was it for me.
We've got one more question from Ian that says, also, what are your recommendations for trying new tones at home in the pre-production phase with less access to a variety of gear?
He's a bass player,
Wow.
so pedals in his case.
There's a million free plugins out there too. If you're familiar with a website called Production Expert, they have a little subset called Pro Tools Expert for us Pro Tools geeks, but they have a page just of free plugins. It's, you know, hundreds of plugins you can find for free, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, and just maybe borrowing gear from friends, and being able to experiment with the different gear. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Mhm.
We kind of alluded to this a little bit in one of the conversations we were having, but we kind of started with pre-production. We've been talking about in the studio. What about maximizing time in the mixing process? Anybody have thoughts on that?
For me, it's really having the artist be as detailed as possible when it comes to notes for the mixes, like extremely as much detail as possible is going to help everything kind of make more sense and be more efficient time wise. It's just being very, very specific what changes and where exactly and what songs, and just being very specific with those edits and changes in the mix.
I would also
Yep.
say trying to, again, approaching this from the viewpoint of somebody who's newer and getting into this, try to really get honed in on using the right terminology, or at least being able to express in multiple ways what you're trying to say. Because somebody says this is harsh,
Yeah.
that means something to me, and it might mean completely different things to the rest of us on the panel. But especially when you're not a pro audio person, you may be using words that are wildly inaccurate, and then you're stressing out the engineer who's trying to make these changes, and you're saying no, I mean this, and you know, so
Yeah.
communication is getting the right words, understanding, getting to that point with your engineer, producer, whoever it is. But it can save you so much time, especially if you're doing unsupervised mixes. I do a mix, I send it out to you, you write me this long email, and it says, just by reading, I'm like, this doesn't even make sense. He's contradicting what he's saying in these words, and I, it's really critical, I think, to be able to talk the same language as a producer or engineer. And we're trying to do the same thing in a reverse sense. I'm trying to figure out what they're saying, but the quicker and the more you can be, one-to-one with what you're saying and what you're asking, I think that's gonna save you a ton of time and headaches.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's important there, I think, in the mixing process too, to know what you're being asked to do, because there are cases where I'll have clients that are coming to me to do the production, but we were planning on going somewhere else to do the mix. And the reason that we're doing that is because we want someone else's creative input. So we're not giving them a bunch of detailed things because we want to see what they would do with what we thought that we were doing.
Right.
And so maximizing mixing time, to me, really for us would mean knowing, are we that guy, or are we the guy that we're just trying to make the most polished sounding version of what these guys have brought into us, with all of us kind of working together, which is, I mean, that's what we end up doing, I think, a majority of the time, because a lot of people don't want to go bring a third party in now for mixing and then go somewhere else. That's just not the way that most people are operating for whatever reason these days. But knowing what your role is in that, if you are simply glorifying what you guys have worked on, or if you're the guy that, because I'll get stuff from somebody and they'll just say, do whatever you think you might use the mute key a lot more than the band would want you to. And they might come back and go, oh my God, I've never, and that just happens to Low Phase. They had somebody else mix. We did the recording here, and they're having somebody else mix it. And we got the mix backs and we were like, oh my God, we would have never thought of those things. So it can be really cool to send it to somebody else and just say, you know what, do whatever you want to do. And then if you don't like it, you don't have to use it. Maybe you still got to pay them. But I mean, it might be worth that experiment sometime just to get a really interesting kind of thing that you weren't expecting.
Brian, any thoughts?
Um, let's see. I had a thought. What was it? So over the course of tracking, I think it's important to have that communication with the musicians and kind of getting an idea of like every step of the way of like how does this sound in relation to these other instruments as we're going along, because as we're tracking, we're kind of maybe doing some subtle mixing over time. And so then by the time we're actually sitting down with all the tracks and ready to edit and mix, we've been working with the groups and they've been there kind of hearing the mix so far. And generally, you know, at a certain point, they're like, I like how it sounds already. It already sounds really great. So down the road, there's not going to be a big shock to them if we're mixing it and they get the mix and it's like completely different. They're going to be like, well, that's weird. It's just really about listening and communicating during tracking to kind of figure out, is this the direction? Does this sound good? Are we moving in the right direction? So you don't have to do maybe as much work in post.
Yeah.
So a thought that I would toss in there too is watch out for too many cooks in the kitchen when it comes to mixing. You know, sometimes this isn't always practical, but you know, if you got the whole band here and a couple of their friends hanging out and an engineer and a producer, and all of a sudden you got 8 people in the control room trying to mix a song, a lot of times it's going to take twice as long and just be a big muddy mess,
Yeah.
you know? And that's tough. You know, everybody in the band's excited to be here and they want to be a part of it and everything. But, you know, the way that I try to approach that a lot of the time, not all the time, but I will say, hey, let me do a first round by myself. You know, I'll often will work out parameters of budget and how much time that's going to be. So it's not just a blank check for me to mix their songs forever, but let me do a first round of 2 hours per tune or whatever. I'll do my thing. I'll send you mixes and then we'll all get together and take it from there, or that kind of thing. Or me and the band leader and the producer, that kind of thing. Just try to watch out for like 10 people in the control room all trying to mix the song together, because it usually doesn't help.
No,
100%.
yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, like when you have, I mean, every band that's ever existed, except for like the Rolling Stones, is broken up. You know, like it's a relationship, it's an artistic relationship. There's going to be tension, you know, and I kind of to what you said, Ian, too, yeah, like developing that obviously like having like a primary person or two or whatever, you know, because like a lot of times, like sometimes guitar players like who like don't listen to the whole thing, they're just listening to themselves. So it's like there was like a meme that was circulating recently. I think you shared it too, Ian. It was like the, you know, big budgets, like $50,000 budgets or whatever. They're like, yep, just do your thing, we love it, you know. And then like the really cheap budgets are like, yeah, can we turn up the vocals, the guitar, the bass, the drums, and everything, you know. And that's what, if you're taking individual opinions sometimes, because it has to be a collective opinion, and I think all ideas should be respected even if you use it or not, you know. But yeah, that definitely, if you're just listening to like everybody, so like I'll say, like I'm like, I definitely don't think that guitar solo should be louder, you know, like I don't know, just speak your mind a little bit, you know. But yeah, having like, yeah, like you said, 8 cooks in the kitchen, that is absolutely not an efficient way in the mixing process, for sure.
When I started in the audio world, there was still a lot of all hands on the console style analog mixing that still exists, but not nearly as often. And so a lot of times you'd have to have the whole band there, because we'd all be mixing a song on a console without automation. And so everybody would have to ride the faders to be this big performance. And the trick that I did was I wouldn't let anybody control their own instrument. If you're the guitar player, you could grab
Nice.
anything but the guitar. Somebody else had to control the guitar. Usually worked out better, I think.
Well, I think we're approaching our wrap up time, but I do want to ask about this last bit about file sharing. And before that, we've got a question from Al asking, what is your preferred DAW? If you want to maybe set your preferred DAW, and then if you have any thoughts on the file sharing process, maybe share those. Chris, would you like to start?
Sure. Pro Tools is preferred DAW for me. File sharing has always been kind of a nightmare. I think we've gotten collectively better at it as it's just become more prevalent in everyone's lives, using, you know, you send it or Google Drive or any of those things. The naming schemes and it is probably the most important thing to think about, because there's always the classic, like, you know, final mix, final version 2. I hate my life. Final. Developing, your own, as an engineer, your own schema, but as a band or sharing it back and forth, some sort of established way to name things. So you guys can all, again, be speaking the same language.
Ian, thoughts?
Well, for the DAW, I'm a Pro Tools dude. I love Pro Tools. But to me, like the exact DAW that you use it doesn't matter as much as what you're used to and what you know. At a certain level, a lot of pro studios still use Pro Tools, so being able to talk that and communicate that way and send files back and forth is super helpful. But Logic is also really great. I mean, they're all great if you know what you're doing with it, unless they're super cheap or free and then they have limitations can't work around. But I love Pro Tools. As for file sharing, the biggest thing I would say is contact the other engineer and talk to them. Don't just make assumptions. Don't just send stuff. I get sent stuff all the time without any explanation or anything. I'm sure we all do. If I get an email from someone saying, hey, I'm sending you some tracks, what do you want to see? Like, oh man, it makes life so much easier. And so just communicate to people. It's a funny thing where these days so much goes through the artist, and a lot of times they're not the most technical person, which is always kind of funny to me. Like, just give me the email address of the other engineer. Let me check in with them and talk with them. And usually that saves a ton of time and trouble.
Brian?
I'm a Cubase guy. Actually, I've been tracking or using Cubase since like the late 90s. It's just a DAW that I'm extremely familiar with and been using it ever since. Played around Pro Tools a little bit and Reaper and like some of the others, but that's the one I'm most familiar with, and it seems to be very solid and stable for me and just know where things are. And it works great. So sharing audio files, I mean, I'm generally just using Google Drive, seems to work fairly well. It can be a hassle sometimes with like permissions and stuff. Naming schemes, when I'm doing mixes, a lot of times I kind of keep it simple. And for any tracks that we're doing, like any daily mixes, I usually have a raw, like raw 1, 2, 3, 4 for those. And then we start doing mixes, mix 1, mix 2 kind of situation. I rarely have any issues with like audio file types. So I don't know. I just don't really have many issues when it comes to sharing files that way. So at least up to this point.
I'd say that's a pretty good thing.
Yeah, I know. It's fine.
Joe, thoughts?
Well, I, like Brian, am all about Cubase. I tried using Pro Tools on the road back when it was in its earlier iteration in laptops, and the spinning beach ball seemed to be all the rage for whatever reason. And honestly, I'm so old that, I mean, I start obviously, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but it was all tape. And so as we progressed into ADATs and things like that, I kind of got into the Roland VS 2480, 1680, 1880. I was big into that world until a friend of mine said, you know what, you got to stop messing around with this stuff and build a computer. And as soon as I did that, I tried out Pro Tools, obviously, and a buddy of mine gave me an illegitimate copy of Nuendo, which is a Steinberg product as well. And I just fell in love with it right away. And so as soon as I started running the recording studio, I knew that I was going to just fall into Cubase. And so I've been using Cubase for 16 years now, I guess. And I think it's great. File sharing, my file sharing one of choice is Dropbox. It's the worst interface ever. I hate using it, but it's just I have so much storage and I have so many clients with folders on there that, I've got people that, and I'm sure you guys do too, 5 or 6 years go by and they say, you know what, can I get the album again from it? And I'm like, yes, it's here in Dropbox. So Dropbox is a really cool thing. Before that, it was a lot of File Hippo. But the naming thing is huge. And when I was working on, I think it was one of Brian's albums, he wanted to have John Holbrook mix it out in New York. And I was a bit terrified to send him all these tracks. And so what I found was best for me is after I started to get a sense of the way most guys mix, which is, you know, kind of drums to bass to guitars. I started numbering like 0-1 kick in, 0-2 kick out, 0-3 snare top, 0-4. And then what's great about that is no matter what DAW you use, when you send them your files, you know, you bounce them all down that last time. And I would name it like 0-1 kick in, and then the song title and the settings maybe, but then put like underscore JH for his initials or whatever. And then I just go into the audio folder and then do a search for underscore JH, upload the whole song, boom, into a folder for him to mix. And so there's a lot of great naming techniques that you can employ to make life easier. And most people don't, though. I'm sure we all have horror stories about opening up 80 and 90 track songs that just literally make no sense. And it throws it in alphabetical order, and the kicks here and the snares at the bottom and the vocals here. And you're just like, oh, and you spend the first 2 hours just trying to get an idea of what's what. So the numbering thing can be really helpful just in terms of keeping stuff tidy. But yeah, Cubase and Dropbox. All that for that.
And I think like at least I did when I started getting into this, the naming thing like seems like such a simple thing. And so I feel like maybe some people are like, oh, it doesn't matter that much, but it's like those details, if you take to just kind of iron them out, it can be so helpful and save so much time. But Kevin.
I'm a Pro Tools user for sure. I've been using Pro Tools since I was 15, 14 years old or something. So I honestly, like, I don't have a preference for it. Actually kind of like annoys me sometimes. Like usually with the spinning death wheel, or like why all of a sudden is there latency when I'm sending to a reverb bus or something, and I just change the bus and it goes away, and I'm like, I don't even know what to think about that, you know, like little things like that happen. And but I mean, all DAWs do the same thing. So I mean, it's finding what works for you. And for me, like, yeah, it's so integrated in my head with the hotkeys and just in the tracking process that I don't even think about it. Like, and that's Ian said even before we started this. He was like, I could hear your keystrokes, yeah, because I'm like hammers, because I don't even think about it, you know. Yeah, so it doesn't. They all do the same thing, you know. So you kind of find which strength. And I mean, I used to use Audacity when I was a kid, or Sony Acid, if anybody remembers that. You know, like the worst that ever. You have 6 seconds of latencies. You know, like it's terrible. And then as far like, I mean, I agree with everybody with file share. I use Dropbox and Drive. I think for me, like the one thing I don't like about sharing a folder is that you don't have like a timeline reference of it. So especially if stuff's kind of drawn out for a long period of time, it's just this one folder that kind of just keeps getting updated and overwritten. So I don't know, for me, like I use Drive, and honestly, a lot of times, especially if I'm doing mixes and like version 1, version 2, whatever, I kind of just send them as individual tracks in Drive, and that keeps that. And then I'm in my car, I can hit send and I can go back to the timeline. I can search it on my email. Whereas like Dropbox, like you said, the interface is terrible. So it's like even just searching for stuff just doesn't show up, or like, you know, so that like I said, Gmail is pretty solidified, you know. And so, but I kind of do a mix. Like Ian's the best at it. Like every time Ian sends me stuff, like obviously through Google Drive, you know, it's very well organized. Yeah, you're the best, dude. So I do that because of you, but then also I still have that kind of like old school, like here's just a cassette tape, like what we did basically, you know, in an email format. But yeah, file sharing it's changing all the time too. Or it's updating. It's like I think we're building towards more of a cloud service anyways. Like I mean, when an old guy comes into the studio or something, they're like, "Can I get a CD?" And I'm like, "Oh shit, I don't even know if I remember how to burn a CD." You know, so it's forever evolving. You know.
Well, I think we're about wrapping up here. I just want to say we got a comment from a couple people. One says, "Nice discussion. Thanks for putting this together. Some great points shared by all." And then we got another one that said, "Lots of great information shared here tonight. I'm glad you all do what you do. Thanks to all the panelists for all their contributions to the Michigan music community." So I guess before we wrap up, does anybody have any final thoughts that they want to share? Any wisdom to impart, or silly stories, nightmare stories, studio, anything?
That we should do another session to talk about that.
Yeah, we need more time for that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I kind of assumed too when we were starting, even when we were kind of joking around earlier before we started this, like probably all have similar information. You know, I don't think one of us has like this like aha, like here's how to do it, and here's like, you know, kind of how the world works nowadays. You know, you get one tidbit of information, it saves your life. It's not really how it works. It's like we're you know, you almost kind of act as a extra band member, you know. So I don't know. Yeah, teamwork, communication, planning, and all that stuff, and then an open mind and an open heart, and you can make a great record.
We need you songwriters to bring great songs to us as soon as possible.
Great songs. That is step one.
Yeah.
And make sure the studio's near a good Mexican restaurant.
Man, ours closed. We had like the best taco place down the road. It was a block away from the studio. It closed.
Boo.
Yep.
Well, beautiful. Thank you so much, guys. This was a lot of fun to be a part of this conversation. And I do want to mention that all of these B-side sessions have been recorded. So you can find them on the Michigan Music Alliance YouTube page. And this was the last one of the season, but they're going to start back up again in September. So you can keep an eye out. And thank you again, everyone, for being a part of this today.
Yeah,
Thanks for
thank you
having
so
us.
much. Nice meeting everyone.
Yeah.